James 1:27 says, "Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress." God the Father loves the family, yet in this fallen world, many children are without parents. On today's program, we will hear about a global non-for-profit family preservation and child welfare organization that cares for orphans and vulnerable children on 5 continents and is a prominent leader in social services worldwide. Also included in their services are adoption, foster care, pregnancy counseling, training, refugee services, sponsorship, and infertility ministry. Founded in 1944, their mission is to demonstrate the love and compassion of Jesus Christ by protecting and enhancing the lives of children and families around the world. Stay tuned.
Trials where faith is grown, I bind myself to His word. To Him I cling, my hope assured. Through blue skies, through the storms, when all is lost, in Him find good. Past the flesh is crucified, by His blood I have new life. Hallelujah, hallelujah. I'll sing on, He set me free. Through each night I sing Him songs, to the God whom I belong. Grief or joy my heart should feel, I'll boast in Christ, my heart be still.
Welcome to the Everlasting Love program. We're so glad that you decided to join us. We want you to know that whatever your situation in life, whatever you might be struggling with, whatever you might be going through, highs, lows, we want you to know that God loves you with an everlasting love and that He has a plan for your life. That's how much He cares about you. always excited to do these programs and to be able to interact with guests who have passion for the work that they do. And specifically on the show today, we're going to be talking to Bethany Christian Services, and I want to introduce you to both of our guests. So welcome to the program. With me is Ruth Bell Olson, who is in Strategic Partnerships, and also Brian DeVos, who is the Senior Vice President of Child and Family Services. Thank you both for being with us today.
Thanks for having us.
So without further ado, I just want to jump right in, and before we actually talk about this global ministry, I'd love to hear both of you talk a little bit about your backgrounds, who you are, what compelled you to jump in and do this kind of work. So Ruth, I'm going to start with you. Ladies first.
Okay, I was looking at Brian like he gets to go first. So thanks for asking. I was raised in a fantastic Christian home with really loving parents and 2 brothers, and went to a Christian college and had all of the privilege that comes with that kind of heritage. But I definitely felt a stirring that I knew that I wanted God to use my life in a really significant way, but I didn't know exactly what that would be. So in 1999, my husband and I were part of a church plant in Grand Rapids, in our home city, and we became part of, in that initial church plant, part of the outreach ministry, which we had kind of a wide open space as to what we wanted to do to serve God locally and globally. And as part of that process, we really felt God saying, I want you to take the most forgotten people, places, and issues in the world and just bring the love of Jesus to those people, places, and issues.
Wow.
So that took us on a really interesting journey as a church community, as an outreach community. One of the issues that we faced, this is 1999, one of the issues we came up against was the HIV/AIDS pandemic. And I just really felt like that was what I was called to really serve into. So I got involved in the AIDS pandemic in Africa, Southeast Asia, nationally, and in our city. So
what was that like?
Oh wow, was that a journey?
Just give us a tidbit.
Okay, so my first trip to Africa was in 2004. It completely ruined me. I went to South Africa and saw firsthand the devastation of the AIDS crisis. And I tell you, going out into a village, and our group got out of a van, and all these kids kind of swarmed us. And I said, well, where are their parents? And they said, well, you looked, and there was one granny over here, and maybe one gentleman over here in the village, and the parents had all died. And I'd read about that, but I'd never had that experience. There's something about, you read and you have that head knowledge, and then when you have that experiential knowledge, it just completely changes you. So I had that experience, and then locally and in our country, the situation looks a little different with HIV. So I became the leader of a local nonprofit, which was outreach into high-risk populations. So it was gay bars, needle exchange, high-risk heterosexual populations. So for a girl from a Christian college, this was an interesting journey. It completely transformed me, and I saw Jesus in places and people that I never thought I would.
But what a great ministry, though.
Yeah, it was pretty phenomenal. So anyway, we're talking about Bethany, so to segue to that. After
that was a stepping stone.
That was a huge stepping stone to really just change my understanding of the world and myself and my place in it, and what God was doing and where He was working. So after that first trip to South Africa and meeting those kids, I just came home and I said to my husband, I think maybe adoption is in our future. These kids need homes, which I think a lot of people who have those experiences, you think, wait, I have a bedroom, or I have space in my heart and my family. So thus we began the adoption journey with South Africa, which took 7 years. South Africa was not open to Americans for adoption. That was a really trying journey.
Really? They were not open to
No,
adoption?
for a lot of reasons. But
how long ago was
that?
So
7 years. We started, 2004, after my first trip, we started. So about 3.5 years into that journey, I had a very pivotal meeting with some leaders at Bethany, and they said, we think there might be a possibility that there could be a program starting in South Africa. Would you be willing to be essentially the guinea pigs? Would you be willing to be part of a pilot program? And so we absolutely said yes, which just was a beautiful thing eventually, but was just an amazingly difficult journey. I can say that now. But a program was developed, and we were one of the first wave of families to adopt from South Africa. So 3 years ago this month, we finalized our adoption of our little guy.
Oh,
And brought
so
him
how old
home.
is your little guy?
He just turned 6.
Oh.
And as I was telling you earlier, Barbara, we brought him home, and it was just a beautiful dream come true, and he's just this amazing kid. But I went through a bit of a grieving process that we, here had been advocating for AIDS orphans and issues surrounding AIDS for many years. And there are millions of AIDS orphans. And so I'd kind of used this, orphans in this general term. And then I brought home one, which is beautiful and wonderful for him and for our family. But I just took one, and I left so many behind. And I thought, wait a minute, what's the plan for these kids, right? They need loving families.
Right.
So a year ago, I was approached by Bethany to come and work at Bethany Global, working to help kids all over the world find loving families.
What a great story, Ruth.
So,
and how your heart was moved, not just for the one, but for like the multitudes. So God kind of just working through you. What a great story. And I know that there's so much more to talk about. So, Brian, it's your turn now.
I can talk.
You get to talk.
Well, I have a similar upbringing. I grew up in a great Christian family. I had a wonderful mom and dad who, helped me through a difficult time when I was little. I had some health issues, and they took care of me wonderfully, and I'll never forget that, how they cared for me and loved me unconditionally, no matter what the circumstances were. And some of those things, and as you grew up, you didn't think about them then, but as you get older, you kind of look back and say, wow, that was really amazing. And so that love that they gave to me, I felt kind of in my heart, that's what all kids deserve. And so also my mom was adopted in the early 1900s, and so adoption was always a really welcomed discussion in our family. And
was it unusual for that to happen in the 1900s?
It was kind of quiet and private, and so it probably happened quietly, and it wasn't as open as things are nowadays. So, but it still happened, but it was more of a secretive process back in the early 1900s.
Did she ever find out who her real parents were?
She did. She researched that probably 20 years ago approximately, and found her and continued that relationship until she passed away. It was very beautiful. So it was very kind of a neat thing. So
that's great.
Still has relationships with some of her cousins that were on the birth side of her family. So it's been a beautiful thing. So very neat. So adoption was near and dear to my heart. I was married about 30 years ago, a little over that. And after about 14 years, I should say, of not having any kids, my wife and I decided that we wanted to have children. So we actually pursued adoption, and we have went through the infant adoption program, and we have 2 wonderful daughters who are now 15 and 13.
Teenagers,
yep. That's why my hair is getting so gray. But they are wonderful kids, and I have a beautiful wife, and I think what we have is just kind of a huge blessing every day to see what God has done through those adoptions, through that whole process. And I could probably talk hours about the process, but I won't.
Sure. Now, was this a local adoption, or?
Yeah, it was in Michigan. The families were from the Michigan area, the birth families, and so and then we have ongoing relationships with them. So we wanted to remain in contact with the birth families for the sake of our kids, and it really was a blessing to do that. It really blessed us more than we thought it would. And so it's been a very wonderful blessing, as we go on. And my oldest daughter was the flower girl in her birth mom's wedding when she got married, which was very cool. And so it's just been a number of unexpected blessings through the whole process as we go down the road. So I'm sure there'll be more.
Yeah. Are they biological sisters?
No,
oh,
no,
okay.
Different families. Yep, birth families. So we have a
that's awesome.
Blended family.
Yeah.
We used to have birthday parties, but too many people were coming over.
Yeah, right.
50, 60 people, we couldn't handle it. So. But anyway, so
blended in the true sense.
That's
right?
correct.
Yes.
Yeah, and for a good reason, right?
Yeah.
We have been blessed by adoption, and my work really got into working with kids, just really advocating for kids to be in good families and to have a good experience, which I believe is what God intends all kids to have.
Yes.
And so that's what kind of drove my passion. So it goes back to the way my mom and dad dealt with me, and in my passion to help kids experience the same type of life. So.
I really liked your selfless comment of how, I was loved in an unconditional way, and I feel like, all children deserve that kind of love, and you're right.
Yep.
So I think, you know, we can like segue then
Sure.
right here and talk about Bethany Christian Services. And from what I understand, you're the guy that knows the history. So why don't you share a little bit?
Well, Bethany started, as you said, in 1944 by two women who were actually Bible college students in the West Michigan area, and they had a passion in their heart to care for kids, just like we do. And so they really started by taking care of one child, and their concern, of course, was for kids who didn't have families, who were either in a difficult family situation or maybe a challenging family situation. And so they started just loving kids and saying, hey, we want kids to be in a loving family. And so through that passion and that drive they had when they started, it just grew through different series of events. So we got into pregnancy counseling when the Roe versus Wade things occurred in the 70s. We got into contracting with different states in the 80s and began providing other services for kids like foster care and reunification services and refugee services. We then started doing work in the area of international adoption and have expanded from one little dream and vision of two ladies to now an organization that has over 1,300 employees. We're in over 100 locations in about 38 states in the U.S. and in over 15 or about 15 countries, right? And our really what goes through our thread is we want a child to be in a loving family.
Yes.
And so all of our work centers around the preservation and the reunification of families and the healing of families. So our work is we have a lot of different social work names for the programs, so foster care, refugee services, as you said. But really the theme that runs through all of them is to help children to be in a thriving, loving family. So that's our work.
So are those two young women still involved?
They passed away.
Oh, okay.
They
right,
a few years back,
1944.
right. So they were college age then, and yeah, they passed away. I think it was about 5 or 10 years ago. Both of them have passed away now.
But to see the legacy that they left behind. So when they passed away, at what stage was the ministry then?
It was about 5 years ago. I think one of the second founders passed away. So they saw it grow. In fact, I had the opportunity once to ask one of them, what did they ever imagine? And she was a very saintly woman. Mary DeBoer and Marguerite Bonema were the two women, and she said to me, I never in my wildest dreams, I still remember her saying that, thought that this would happen. And so she just was a saintly lady and really was amazed by what was going on and what God had done through Bethany. So it's been pretty miraculous.
Yeah, that is.
Yeah, just that a humble act of service to say, I see a need and I'm going to meet it, would grow to be, all over the U.S. and all over the world, right? Advocating for children.
Well, and I was going to say to those who are watching, I mean, how inspirational is that two people, it makes me think about even like, I think like Miss Field's cookies.
Yeah.
I think it was in someone's kitchen or something.
Right.
You know, but that for those who are watching that, God put something in your heart.
Right.
You just, you don't
never
know,
do with it,
right? If you, just pray and seek Him, and you just never know where that's going to go, right? What how powerful, and it's still going on, and it'll probably keep going on, and it's growing, and so it's a not-for-profit organization, and I was thinking back to them and how they actually built this, and so how is the organization supported?
Okay, we have fees for services. We have, so in other words, like some of the adoption programs, the adopted parents will pay fees for those services. And we also have contributions, which is about 15% of our budget. And then we have contracts with different entities, such as states and federal government and counties. So we believe in partnering with the faith community and the government and carrying out the work. And that's, so our funding source is kind of blended and mixed, and then it varies from location to location, from state to state.
Okay.
A lot of the global work is funded by either grants or private foundations or contributions. And that's a challenging area to get funding for.
Sure.
And the need is so great, as Ruth said.
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit about that, Ruth. The global, before we kind of hone in on kind of some of the specific services. And then I think since you both have been involved for so long too, just maybe even now kind of thinking about like personal stories. I mean, mean, and when I say personal, I mean not, we've already heard yours, but like, you know, personal
Some examples.
experiences, right, that you've had, you know, within Bethany Christian Services. But let's talk about the global aspect of it.
So Bethany Global started in the early 80s with, as Brian said, inter-country adoption, or we'd say international adoption, facilitating those adoptions from places all over the world. Started in Asia, but it has grown to many locations around the world. And as you may know, international adoption is a really tricky scheme, right? Countries open or close. Like Russia was a huge country for international adoption. Now it's closed to America. So there are all kinds of interesting things that happen at the government level when we're engaging in intercountry adoption.
So is that, do they close for political reasons?
Oh, usually, right? There are all kinds of.
It's not about the children as much as it is about the politics.
Right, and human trafficking and child trafficking is a very stark reality.
Yes.
So. Even though we have the best intentions, of course, and we're going to do things above board, and we're going to make sure we have all the correct paperwork and that kind of thing, there are lots of people who don't have good intentions. So this is the world we live in, right? So in around 2006, international adoptions into the U.S. were somewhere in the 20,000s, the number of children who were adopted internationally into our country. And last year there were a little over 6,000, I believe, total.
So it's dropped that much.
So international adoption, inter-country adoption, I use that term, I use those terms interchangeably, has dropped significantly. And for some good reasons and for some not so good reasons, right? Trafficking, as I mentioned. In China, if you want a healthy infant, your wait will be about 8 years for adoption. That hasn't always been the case. But Chinese families are keeping their baby girls, and they're relaxing one-child policy. There's some really good reasons why some of these numbers are dropping. But all of this to say, international adoption is dropping, but the needs of children and the orphan rates are rising. So Bethany Global has been a really interesting transition phase. We will still continue to do inter-country adoptions, particularly with children with special needs. We do a lot. It's kind of a niche area for us. We have a lot of families that adopt older children, children with HIV, children with, developmental delays.
Really? You would think that would not be the case, right? You would think that nobody wants those children, but yet you're saying that there are families out there.
Oh my goodness, absolutely. We have a campaign right now.
How beautiful is that?
Right, our campaign right now is called These 400. We're just challenging the community, the adoption community, to adopt 400 children that are on a waiting child list, and we've already, the last number was about 96, did I see?
Right. Yep.
Of children with pretty significant special needs, that children that are typically hard to place.
And when you say special needs, can you just kind of define that a little?
Oh, that could mean anything from cleft lip and palate to Down syndrome to HIV to children that sibling groups, older kids that are just simply harder to place because of their age. Yep. So we're doing a lot of adoptions of kids that are kind of, I would say, the least of these, right?
Yeah.
And who does God's heart break for,
beautiful
right?
Human beings,
of course, and every human deserves dignity and a chance. So. We're finding more and more that we have kind of a niche market. That sounds kind of crazy, but a niche, I should say, in those kinds of adoptions. So we're really proud of that, and that's really exciting. But as I said, the orphan rates are rising, and the needs for kids continue to grow.
So the orphan rates are rising, but there's less kind of inter-country adoption.
So Bethany Global has said, wait a minute, we care about kids, and we care about child welfare. And we do this at 100 locations around the U.S., and we've been doing it for 70 years. So what does it look like to take excellent child welfare practices and export them around the world, right? And if we say our vision is that every child deserves a loving family, so that's every child everywhere, regardless of where you were born. So we are working actively now to do foster care and domestic adoption in countries all over the world. So I'll give you an example of what happened in Ethiopia. We've done inter-country adoptions in Ethiopia for many years, and about 5 years ago, we did a training with a group of churches in Ethiopia, the church leaders and pastors. What does it mean to care for an orphan? In Ethiopia, the cultural practice is kinship care. If my sister dies, I'll take her child, right? But if we're not blood related, then I don't have any responsibility for you. Well, that's a cultural practice, but what's what's God's heart? What's God's practice? He says, wait a minute, we're all adopted into the family of God, right?
Yeah.
So what does it mean for us to step outside of our kinship circle and say, wait a minute, we're all part of the family of God? So we did a training with a group of church leaders, and they got it. They got it. Wow, these orphans are our responsibility. We get to care for orphans as we mirror the heart of God in our community. So they went to their churches and re-preached those sermons and said, do any of you want to volunteer to be foster and adoptive families? And hands went up, and families said, I want to be trained to be a foster parent. And can I tell you, there's no word in Amharic for foster care.
Wow, that's...
And now it's being practiced.
The outcomes are amazing.
Right? There's no word for that. It's such a foreign concept. And now, 5 years later, we have placed over 100 kids into loving Christian homes, orphaned kids in Ethiopia that would be in an orphanage, they'd be on the street, they'd be, right? Who knows where they'd be?
It sounds like the strategy is to go to the people of God, right? To go to the churches.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Because you can leverage the Word of God, right?
Absolutely.
So yeah, that and I guess the other part, because I was thinking of like in the United States, we have a lot of like social services, and there's you know other kinds of like funding and resources. I don't know what that looks like in a place like Ethiopia, because a family might shy away, right, from like, I love to do this, like my heart wants to do it, but then where are the resources to help me?
So there's not a lot of government resources.
Yeah.
So that's where we work to try to get grants or foundations to support our work in Ethiopia, Haiti, China, and other
churches
areas.
and individuals.
Yep, and individuals as well. And then our sponsorship program also helps that fund the work that we do overseas. So sponsoring a family so that they can care for their children. Many times kids go into orphanages because their family can't afford to care for them. And so it's not because they don't have a parent available or able.
So is that the primary reason that you would say it's not the primary reason?
It's not the primary, but it's a big reason.
It's a big reason.
And then kids with special medical needs, they don't have the resources to meet those needs.
Okay.
So, but I think if there were resources available to the families, they probably could care for those kids.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll give you an example of, we call our family preservation program our sponsorship program globally. You're probably familiar with like child sponsorship programs where you give $30 a month or whatever to sponsor a child. We have what's called a family sponsorship. So you have the share of a family. So you don't pick one child out of the family unit and sponsor them. You have, think of it like a pie, you have a share, so you'd have a slice of that that you fund keeping the family together. So there's a story of a woman in Ethiopia that was going to have to release her 3 children to the orphanage because she couldn't afford to support them. They were living very, very close to subsistence. And through the family sponsorship program, she was given a goat. And she started a business, and she was able to sell the goat milk, and she was able to grow her business and keep her children.
Very nice.
And the last time we checked in with her last fall, her business is thriving, and she's ready for a cow. Right? So it's simple
so
things.
simple.
A goat
Right.
kept these boys with their mom, and she's flourishing, and she's doing so well. So she's to the point where she doesn't need that family sponsorship money anymore because she's sustainable, right? She's found a way to support herself.
So great.
So sometimes it's something quite small that when we talk about keeping families together and bringing families together, kind of the 2 pillars of Bethany's work. Well, sometimes that family preservation is not so tricky, but she was very close to releasing those kids to an orphanage, right?
And that's kind of a child welfare best practice in the U.S., right, is to try to preserve families. So we've taken some of those beliefs of what we've learned over the years, and with family preservation is to do what we can to preserve a family. So in our work here in the U.S. with foster care or family preservation services, we're working with families to try to keep their kids with their biological parents whenever possible. So every year, there's millions of reports of abuse and neglect. And so some people feel that the state tries to take kids away. Well, it's not really true. The state wants the family to stay together.
Yes, I believe that,
And so we work with them to try to do that. So we go into those homes and try to work on the problems that are affecting the family, whether it's could be drugs and alcohol, or it could be unemployment or underemployment or education issues, and try to help the families come back together. And when they're successful, it's very, very, very exciting to see that work and see the work done, and and then those kids can grow up with their biological families. So, and so our work is always to try to keep the family unit together as much as possible. And then we take some of those practices and kind of use them universally, right, within the cultural context. So they fit well. We always look at the culture that we're going into, making sure that it respects that and it's driven by that culture. So yeah, it's.
Talk a little bit more about like the foster care aspect, and your role too as a senior vice president, right? Like what that entails.
Well, we try to expand our services and have good, high-quality services in the area of child welfare, so social services for kids. So that typically is in-home family preservation services, foster care services, family reunification services, foster care adoption, and then there's refugee services. So those are for refugees that come into the U.S. And so what we're trying to do is create a really solid and strong quality service program, which is in the best interest of kids. So we know.
I'm sorry, Brian, when you say for refugees coming in, so you're talking about children?
Children and families that come into the U.S.
That are coming in, okay. And so that's something different than foster care, though, right? So, yeah, I would love to hear about
There's
that.
also refugee foster
it's
care.
Refugee foster care. That's why I said foster care.
This is very multifaceted.
Okay, yeah, so
we'll stick with the domestic foster care.
Well, but I'd love to hear about that too, right? With the number of refugees that have been coming in, right? And like even being, having a connection to like Syrians, right? And knowing the number of Syrians refugees that have come, to the United States as of recent, right?
Right, and so, so domestically in foster care, I'll start there a little bit. So we work with the states and the counties and recruit quality foster homes who meet the needs of the kids who need a good family. And then obviously work in case management to try to get the families back together. If those kids can't go back home with their biological parents, then we look for an adoptive family for those children. And so that's our foster care adoption program. And there probably are a little over 400,000 kids in the U.S. in foster care. And a little over 100,000 of those kids are waiting to be adopted. Now, a number of those have identified families, but they're waiting. But there's also a group of kids within that number that don't have families, and they're in what they call the state exchanges. So those are where kids who have not found an adoptive family who've been waiting for a long time, sometimes 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, they're actually trying to recruit actively families for those children. And so in Michigan it's the MARE book, in Texas I think it's the TARE book. There's different names for those books, but it's called the Adoption Resource Exchange. Many of those are online. If you go to the state website, you can type in adoption and usually you'll find their website.
And why does that sound creepy to me?
It is creepy. It's sad. It's sad that in a country with so much and with so many churches that these kids wait for a family. It really is sad. And many of these kids do have some special needs, so they need the right kind of family, the right kind of care. But we have a program called the NOW campaign, which is No One Without. And so we are trying to actively recruit families from the faith community, typically, to step up and adopt these kids. And it's been very successful.
So how do you do that? Are you going to churches?
Yes.
Okay.
So we'll go into a church and ask them if we can have an informational meeting. We'll maybe try to raise awareness within that congregation of what the need is, because many times we find out they're not really have a clear understanding of what the need is.
Okay.
And how many kids are waiting and even sometimes what foster care is. And so we have to educate on what the need is and how they can get involved. And then we work with them to figure out a way. What can you do? Can you support adoptive families in your church? Can you help us recruit foster and adoptive families? Can you have support groups for kids who've been adopted?
So there's like different ways that a church could support.
Yep. And then it could also be financial support, of course, or prayerful support. So some churches will get prayer champions, and they will pray to find a home for a specific child, like through the NOW campaign or through the These 400. And we believe it works, so we want to continue to do that. And the faith community is wonderful in stepping up and getting involved to respond to really what you quoted in James 1:27 earlier, right?
Right.
And so that's where we believe that the real answer is to help these kids. And so we have to train the families. We have to help them to understand where these kids come from. Many of these children have been through some trauma, and so they need very unconditionally loving parents and well-educated parents to know how to handle and deal with the challenges that they most likely will face. But many times these kids do well when they're in a loving, stable family and they have parents that say, I want you, I'm crazy about you.
What a difference that makes,
you know?
right?
And not that they just erase all their memories, but it really helps them to work through that stuff. So we believe the family, which is core to our beliefs, is the center for healing and restoration for these kids. So that's what we try to do. So it's you know, recruiting the families, training the families, and then providing some support and supervision while they have the placement.
Yeah, because I was going to ask about the support, but also the accountability, right? Like, so what does the follow-up look like, right?
Right.
We want to check in with the families, you know, 3 months, 6 months, you know, just to make sure that they're also continuing their end of the bargain, right?
Exactly. And we try real hard on that end, and it's more intense than that even. And so, but yeah, we have to supervise, make sure things are going well, and then once we're not involved, we have a post-adoption resource center that families can call for assistance. And so we want to be there for families to help them to get the help they need when they need it. And be a support to them. So that's right. The good supervision and case management after the placement is very, very important and critical.
Yeah, is there such thing as a success rate? You know, like when you think about like all these, you know, children going into foster care, because I'm sure that there are situations where maybe it doesn't work out, but like if you could put a percentage on, you know, or give a success rate, is there such a thing? Or
yeah, I'm not sure what that number would be and how you would exactly measure that. Ideally, it'd be nice if kids wouldn't have to go into foster care in the U.S., right? And so we do have some programs like Safe Families for Children that help kids from going into foster care. And so I think a success would be, though, that in a really rapid time, within a few months, that the family would restore and get back on track with whatever the issue was that affected the child to be removed, and that child could then successfully be reunified. And I don't know exactly what the national standard is on that number. But I would guess it's around a year that it takes. So it'd be really good if it was less than that, right? Because I always have believed the longer, you know, if a child is away from their biological family, you know, really not by their choice because of a problem, it's pretty traumatic. So we have to really work hard to try to get that family healed and back together.
So are there a lot of adoptions that take place for children who are in foster care?
Yes.
Because I'm assuming that they can adopt those children if that opportunity exists.
Yeah, they can, but the first goal is always to reunify in the majority of the cases. If that's unsuccessful, then there's a process, a legal process, and it's a little different state by state, but that the children have to go through to be available for adoption. So
talk a little bit about the refugees then too.
So we've been working, like Ruth said, since the 80s, resettling refugees. It started with families and unaccompanied minors, the Sudanese, the lost boys of Sudan. And so recently it's been some kids from Central America, and then also from Syria in that area. We've had some families come from Syria recently. And so just because of the trauma in the country, the political really usually trauma or war, then families get dislocated and in refugee camps, and then we get a referral through the federal government when they're available to come into the U.S. And help them to resettle. So again, we use a faith community there. With foster homes or with support groups around the families to help them to find a place to live, to find jobs, to get their kids in school, to adjust to our climate in Michigan.
To Michigan.
And so we can relate there, right? I mean, we're probably, no, right,
So we get kids and we get youth who are, you know, 17, 18, 19, who never will go back home to their families. And then we get families. So we really work with different entities for funding to do that work through the federal government. And then we help to resettle them in families and try to restore their lives and get them through the trauma.
Jobs get connected in the community. And
it's really tough because they usually, like the Lost Boys, went through a lot, and the people coming from the war-torn countries.
We had them on our program actually several years back, and it was such a fun program.
Right.
And just when you think about just like a toilet, right?
Right.
And they talked about things that just stunned them, you know, just something as simple as like a working toilet.
Exactly.
But and it helps us to really appreciate what we have. But yeah, right, trying to resettle them, trying to get them accustomed to the culture, and then you've got language barriers, and so I assume that you, and maybe I'm assuming incorrectly, but that you partner with a lot of other agencies, right?
Yes.
Like World Relief Organization. I don't know. I just threw that out there, but a lot of other agencies to help with language and other needs.
Yeah, locally, of course, in the States, when we resettle the families, we connect with different language entities, and sometimes there's different religions that the families come from, so we have to help them adjust to that. And so there's a lot of adjustment that a family coming into our culture. You know, it's a big change. And so we have to reach out to a lot of different community resources. So a lot of our services are community-based. So the communities where the kids and the families end up resettling, for instance, are actively involved in helping those families.
So let's just talk about so the foster care and then adoption, and talk about like the vetting process, right? Like so. I want to be a foster parent, and so what is that like for me? What do I have to go through?
Well, it's similar for foster care to be a foster parent and to be an adoptive parent. There's some different little twists, but typically you have to go through some record checks. So you have to have your background checks done, either police or protective services backgrounds. You have to have a home study where a social worker, licensed social worker, comes out to your family and interviews you, probably individually as well as a family, does some social history work, and then also you have to get references, obviously, from different entities to verify your ability and I guess desire and intent to be a foster or adoptive family. But then there's also the training part. So we help to assess in that process what training needs you may have. So if you've never had experience like Ruth has talked about with a child with HIV, well, you need to get some education on that so that you're prepared for that. You've never adopted a child with a physical disability, so you might have to get some training and education on that. So we kind of assess the families, find out what their experiences have been and what they've done, and then have some training for them. And then there's usually state required training, specifically for foster care, and then some infant adoption. And so there's required training that every state might have a little different twist on what that is. So really the emphasis now more than ever, it's better than it used to be, is preparation. And so we want families as much as possible to be prepared for a placement. So it can be anywhere from 2-month to 5 or 6 month process. It depends on how active the family is in getting it done. You know, if they want to get it done right away, it can get done in probably 2-3 months. And so it's a process, and then they have to do their training as well. So,
And how long does so do I have to go through training every year? What does the term look like?
Yeah, for foster care, every state has different kind of criteria on that, but there's usually annual required training. And so if you'd become licensed as a foster parent, then every year you'd have to go to like 12 or 24 hours of training. Some can be self-training, but it might be it might be like a CPR training you have to do every year, and different things like that. So there are requirements.
So I'm believing that most of these foster care situations are working out well, but play the devil's advocate for a minute. And what about the stories where it doesn't work out and there's something, that foster family really doesn't live up to what they should live up to, and a child can even be further traumatized. Any of those stories?
It happens, unfortunately, occasionally, rarely though, I would say, in our system anyway, with Bethany, and we get sick when it happens, okay? So we don't like to see that happen. And if that would happen and it was substantiated, that license, that foster home license, would be ended, because we do not try to allow any of that. So we do our best to screen, and fortunately it doesn't happen that often, but it does occasionally. So it's pretty traumatic, and not a good situation. So we grieve when that happens.
Yeah, sure.
So we need families that I think are really willing to, you know, first of all, stick to it, right, and really be in. They have to be in the game. And I think too is to go with the flow a little bit, because there's going to be challenges. There's going to be some struggling times, especially if you have teenagers or sibling groups or kids with special needs. And so they have to be really, really patient and willing to work through those things and work through those challenges. Yeah.
So do you have most of the people on board, or like as part of your organization, who have the skill sets to do all of this kind of training? Like, so what are some, like, do you have social workers and what?
Most are social workers. Many
These are like
master's
licensed
level,
social?
licensed with the state. And again, many states require that they have to be licensed. And so they've had the child welfare experience. So in other words, they've gotten a degree in learning how to work with kids and what the child welfare system is, how it works, because there's a legal process in the child welfare system as well. And so, and they have to go through training too as well. And that again varies state by state, but they may have to do a certain number of weeks or hours of training before they can do actually the work.
Absolutely.
And then they have an annual, usually required training that they have to do as well. So, and they're evaluated internally and supervised as well by their supervisor, and then are regularly part of a lot of accountability things that occur in the system. So, so, yeah, certainly it's not perfect. But we work very, very hard to keep our quality high and take it very seriously.
Yeah, I like to say that Bethany is full of technical experts in child welfare. The level of expertise, the level of excellence is very, very high. So like what Brian was mentioning about and your questions about foster care and finding great families. And of course we love to recruit families from churches and faith-based communities, because they do have an understanding and a framework of God's heart for the most vulnerable and needy, right? And you mentioned the orphan and the widow, and I would say that also includes the alien and the foreigner and the prisoner, right? Who are the people that are on the fringes? Who are the people on the outside? And I think we understand as people of faith that that's where we go, right?
Yes. No. Right. Are there some stories that have just really touched your heart? And you know, as you think about like this journey and this work, and maybe there are many, but is there?
There's a lot of them, yeah.
But you know, can you think of maybe one or two that really have bubbled up to the top for you? I'd love to hear you share, whether it's a refugee story or an adoption or foster care or you know whatever. Can you think of?
Do you want me to share a
global
story? Well, as Brian mentioned, the process of finding families and training and all of the hours of training and vetting all of that, we do the same thing globally that we do in this country. So training foster and adoptive parents in a place like South Africa, we're involved in a community that is pretty desolate. It has a lot of hardship. And the first time I drove through this area called Botshabelo, I thought, oh, this is just a poor, sad. It's about 250,000 people that under apartheid were just dropped in this corner of South Africa, and there's very little economic enterprise, very, very little good going on in that community as a person driving by, right? You think, kind of like Nathaniel said, what good can come of Nazareth? Right. You know, I had a little bit of that feeling driving through Botshabelo the first time. And then we did a training through the churches. It was, you know, kind of spread throughout the community that we were doing a training for families who would want to care for orphans. And I mean, the room was so full that day. We were hoping that maybe there would be 25 or 50 families, ideally. And the first day, like 150 families came. And the next day, 160 families came.
How do you get the message
through the
out?
churches?
Through the churches.
Through the churches.
Okay.
And this is a highly traumatized community, high levels of trauma, lots of orphans and vulnerable children. And these families came out of the woodwork from the churches, just saying, I want to be part of this. I want to be part of changing our community and changing the next generation. And so this was last February, we did the training and got to meet some of those families. And I went back last November, and some of those families had gone through their home study. They had gone through the training. They were ready. Like they had gone, I mean, it's different, as he said, state to state, but we would say internationally we want to have the same type of standard. They had jumped through all of those hoops, and they were ready to receive a child into their home. And one family, the couple had been married for quite a while, and they were not able to have biological children. And I think of the cultural, I think there's still shame and stigma in our country around infertility. And I thought, wow, in that community, there's got to be just a lot of natural heartache, but then there is that shame and stigma.
Yes.
And through this training and through the opportunity that Bethany was able to provide, they were so excited to become parents. It was like they had the permission now, like I can finally realize this dream of being parents because I've been trained and equipped, and now I can not only care for an orphan in my community, but I get to be a parent. And their joy,
yes,
you know, their joy at being able to take on this huge responsibility, but to do it not only because it's close to the heart of God, but because they've been praying for a child all those years and they didn't know how.
Yes. Now, is the government aware that you guys are? I mean, you have to have permission, right,
absolutely.
to go in.
Yep.
And so they're seeing and they're witnessing all of this too.
Can I tell you the training that I mentioned where all those families kept coming? The government officials, the social welfare officials in that part of South Africa came to the training too.
Right. That was very cool.
And we're talking about the heart of God, and we're talking about God's heart for kids, and we're talking about how to care in an excellent manner and do home studies. And they're sitting there taking notes, just as involved as some of the other community members.
So you take a team of trainers out and
it's Indigenous leaders in South Africa.
That's the best way to do it,
in
right?
South Africa, the social workers are, right now it's a handful of women who grew up in that community and went away to college and got trained and are coming back to serve their community.
Try to make a difference.
So that's in our international programs, the leadership is people from the community, right? We might do some training and help them and empower them and set the standard. You know, there's an excellent standard for child welfare. This is the standard, right? We're not going to do it kind of halfway because it's a developing world. Nope, we're going to hold to the standard. And so the leaders are people from the countries where we're serving, and really cool to see them addressing these issues in their own communities as well.
And we experience that here too, so I can think of a number of stories where governments have called us, and usually the DHSs or the child services in the state, and said, we have these kids that we can't find a family for, and so we'll do some special recruitment. But I remember a young man who had a very bad experience through foster care, which was unfortunate. And he was removed from his birth mom because of her struggle with drugs and alcohol, and which went on for a number of years. And so from his early years till he was like 17 and almost 18 years old. And I remember him telling us and our staff that he really wanted to find his mom, you know, his bio mom. And they did eventually find her, long story short, after a few years. And his bio mom had gotten clean and had a great life. She had gotten a profession, went to school and stuff and got a degree and was in a profession, working, doing really, really well. And we found her and reunited them. And it was just an awesome thing. And then he told us that he had made a commitment in his heart that if he didn't find his mom by his 18th birthday, he was going to kill himself. And this was about a month or two before his 18th birthday. And so I say that to say a lot of kids who are in that age in our country, there's probably, I think it's 20,000 kids or so that age out of foster care that don't have a family, feel that way. They feel, you know, forgotten, and they struggle with going through high school and college. They're up against a lot of odds, and families need to be available to care for those kids too. And if it can't be a bio family, then it could be a mentor family or an adoptive family,
a church family.
Or a church family.
I just need to know that somebody really loves me. The power of that parent-child relationship, and if I can't get it from a birth parent, if there's someone out there that just loves me unconditionally. I mean, you're both doing that right now, right? So, so if you could make an appeal to the audience right now, or say something to them, I'd like for you to look in the camera, one of you, both of you, maybe just a minute, and tell them, you know, make an appeal to them, or make an appeal to the church around this work. And the camera's right there, so go for it.
I could say that I would encourage everyone who's watching or listening, or watching and listening, to find a way to get involved in helping at-risk children and kids who are in trouble, and families who are struggling. So the key is to get involved however you can, whether it's prayer, financial support, becoming a mentor, becoming a foster or adoptive family, or sponsoring a child overseas. Get involved. That's what makes a difference in this world.
Okay. Amen.
There is a need that affects children around the world. No matter the country, China, Ethiopia, South Africa, Haiti. The list is long. This need is real and urgent, but it is severely underestimated. Today, around the globe, over 150 million children are considered to be orphans. In Zambia alone, there are over 1 million orphan children due to factors like poverty and HIV/AIDS. As these children grow older, most will surpass the age limit and will end up in the streets with no home or family to go to. What if each of these children had a loving family? What if every orphaned and vulnerable child in the world had a loving family? This is the mission of Bethany Global. Bethany Global and the Christian Alliance for Children of Zambia have partnered together to train Zambian families to become foster and adoptive parents to the orphans in their communities. Traditionally, orphan children would find a home with a relative, yet when this is not possible, children are often placed into institutions, facilities like orphanages. Foster care is an alternative that places these children into loving families. Research has demonstrated that children need families, not institutions.
What this foster care program is doing is decongesting even the facilities, because we find that there are a lot of children in these facilities. There is no quality care. These children have never had a chance to be in the families. But because of this foster care program, these children will have a chance to be in families. These children will have a chance to grow up as normal children.
You know, there's this light that you see in children in families, children who are happy in families. They have this light in them that indicates what lives on the inside of them. You know, they're not blank as my open palm. There's just something about them that they don't have to say anything, but you look at them and you see it in their eyes. Now, when you come to an institution like this, they may eat and dress well and do all these things, but they lack that light. You don't see it in them. It's not there.
However, moving children from institutions into families and ensuring that these families are well-trained and monitored requires a high level of expertise. This is where Bethany Global shines.
The most dramatic change that has been there since Bethany came on board is the fact that it has awakened us to the fact that fostering is something that can happen in Zambia. It's a very foreign concept.
Bethany Global knows how to inspire, educate, and empower families to respond to the orphans and vulnerable children in their midst by opening their homes and their hearts. The results are astonishing. This is the kind of awakening that we envision, not just for Zambia, but for the whole world.
Bethany is guiding us all the way. Bethany has given us all these home study reports, how we're supposed to do it, how we should do it accurately, how there should not be disruptions if you place a child in a family.
What really makes us happy is to see a child go into a family, because I think that it is unnatural for a child to grow up in an institution.
It is simply not okay that over 150 million children on the globe today are considered orphans. It's also not acceptable to envision institutions as the answer to this problem. We can do better. Bethany alone cannot reach every orphaned and vulnerable child, but together with global partners like you, we can have a tremendous impact. This worldwide need requires allies from all segments of society on every continent, churches, agencies, governments, and individuals. The story of what is happening in Zambia is one example of how powerful partnership can be.
I think this is changing the concept of people even in the communities. They know that they can actually get involved in taking care of the vulnerable children.
It was like a very great awakening in the people of God, and I think this was so dramatic and so effective, and I know that it's still going on.
Will you partner with us and help serve this need? Together, we can find loving homes for orphans and change the world, one child at a time. Contact us today at 1-800-652-7082 or visit us at bethanyglobal.org.